Welcome to our Leaders in Housing Counseling call. We're glad you're here in August. We usually have a lower turnout on August calls, but looks like today's going to be a strong one as well. So glad everybody's hanging in there. We will spend a little bit of time on the on legislative issues and Melody's work in Congress, and get to review the logjam and mess that's happening over there, and where we think it might go. And then I'll talk a little bit just on certification and where we're at currently. Just a quick update on how we got here and where we're at. And I think there's some good news in terms of the actual numbers of people passing the test. So stay tuned for that. And the bulk of the call will be really on our work to really improve the success rate of the remaining counselors who have not taken or have not passed the test. And I think, as we've talked about it in the past, and it's been raised by a number of you, there's a number of very experienced counselors who have taken the test several times and not passed. There are people with challenges around language issues who are not native speakers, and there's a host of things. And we tried to kind of break these out into subgroups. We'll have one person talk about each of the subgroups. There's still time to participate in some of them if you want, and we will use that as a framework to approach HUD and then also evaluate if there are things we can continue doing on our own inside our own community. And we'll do a quick plug on NHRC membership, and just delighted how many people, many organizations in today's environment are renewing their dues. We've brought in some new members in the current environment. We really appreciate all that support. So with that, let's dive into Congress. So Melody, what is happening?
Thank you. So the really big news for this week is, after several discussions with Senator Kamala Harris's office. Kamala or Kamala? Senator Harris.
Kamala. I have to learn to say this.
Yes. Senator Harris, Democrat from California, has introduced the Relief Act. I believe it's a title for it, S-4919. This is a bill to sort of address the sort of rental and homeownership crisis that we're sort of seeing through the last couple of months, that was exacerbated by COVID-19. There's several provisions in the bill that I'll spare you, but the big news for us is that we talked to her, and we're really excited that it's going to be $700 million for NeighborWorks for housing counseling in the legislation, and no less than 40% of funds, as you can see on the screen, shall target minority and low-income homeowners and renters and those experiencing or at risk of homelessness. I just spoke with her office today and got final legislative text, because if you look for it on congress.gov, it's not there yet. But in the legislative text, we also included language on eligible uses, which includes things like technology and equipment for those who are doing housing counseling virtually. So we're really happy with the legislation. That portion of the bill mirrors the Coronavirus Housing Counseling Improvement Act, which was sponsored by Senators Brown, who is the ranking member of Senate Banking, very high-ranking Democrat in the Senate, as well as Senator Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey. So this is now two housing counseling Senate bills that is asking for the exact same thing, which really improves our chances in the Senate, because when they do negotiate the stimulus, next slide, when they do negotiate the stimulus, when they return from recess in mid-September and start taking up bills again, we're in a much stronger position, because they're basically communicating to Senate Republicans that housing counseling is a priority to Senate Democrats, and they want a very high number for the legislation. As I said in previous calls, the HEROES Act, which was the appropriation language for COVID-19 pandemic that was passed by the House and drafted by House Democrats, had $100 million for housing counseling in the bill. But we understand now that is not going to be the sort of the field of play in the Senate, as they aren't using the HEROES Act, from what we hear, as part of negotiations. So we believe that Senate Democrats will have to craft their own individual bill, taking a lot from the HEROES Act, but essentially making their own. So we're really excited to know that housing counseling is very, very likely to be in a Senate Democratic stimulus negotiation bill, and that $700 million for neighbor works is where their starting point. Obviously, everything can change on the Hill. Things are moving very fast. We aren't exactly sure if $700 million will be the final amount, if housing counseling will be included in the final stimulus package, if there is one. But it gives us optimism. And I just should note this. While both bills say it would fund NeighborWorks, all HUD-approved housing counseling agencies would be eligible for the funding, so it wouldn't just be for NeighborWorks organizations. I just wanted to clarify that. Moving right along on appropriations. Previous slide, please. Thank you. Just very briefly, I said in the previous call that the THUD appropriations bill for $75 million for housing counseling passed the House, and it's in the Senate. But as I just said previously, the Senate's likely not to take up any legislation until mid-September at the earliest. They're currently in recess. We imagine that they're going to prioritize COVID-19 funding talks over appropriations, as they can easily just pass a continuing resolution, a CR for short, to continue funding the government. I think the priority right now in the Senate side is absolutely COVID-19 funding, especially given a lot of the disagreement around unemployment, and now especially the president's supposed executive order on moratoriums and the like. So I believe the Senate's going to move on COVID, but I just wanted to give you guys an update on appropriations, that this would be a pretty sizable increase from the $53 million that was for fiscal year 2020. So, our advocacy is definitely working. People are talking about housing counseling. People are recognizing its need now more than ever with the pandemic. Governors, senators, House reps, constituents, practitioners are all talking about how we have a pending eviction and foreclosure crisis that will probably mirror, if not be worse, than 2008. And so, next slide. I would tell you that even though Congress is currently in recess, that's an incorrect term. It should be state work week. So a lot of senators are now doing a lot of constituent work. They're talking to their districts. And essentially what we want during this time is to keep the drumbeat going. They're listening to a lot of different players, especially in the housing space, and we need to make sure that housing counseling stays at the forefront of any sort of negotiation talks, especially with housing. As you can see on the screen, I would just tell you to reach out to your senators. Right now, the House side is kind of, I won't say done, but the majority of the work that advocates are doing are in the Senate. The HEROES Act has passed the House. The fiscal year 2021 appropriations bill has passed the House. So all the conversations are really stalling in the Senate. So we really, really, really need Senate support. And in particular, we need Senate Republican support. So as I said previously, Senator Brown, who was ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee, is in support of housing counseling. Senator Harris from California is in support of housing counseling. We've had many senators support us during a Dear Colleague letter that was circulated by Senator Menendez earlier in the year, which feels like forever ago, but I'll let that stand. 2020 has been strange. We really need Senate Republican support. So if you have a senator that sits on appropriations, on banking, or really any committee at this point, you really, really need to make the case. You need to explain to them in detail with data, whether that's data you're collecting in real time, data from previous years, examples of an increase in calls about evictions or foreclosures, how you're helping people, the problems that they're facing. They need to hear from you guys about what's happening in their communities and why housing counseling is essential to any talks on a recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. This is going to be a long-standing problem that will continue on far beyond this year and possibly next. And so we need the funding, not just for right now, but for the immediate future. And I would just, if you need any assistance with making talking points, reach out to me. If you need assistance reaching out to your senator, feel free to email or call me. We'll send out that information after the call, and I'm happy to help. But this is the time. We have a couple more weeks to really try and make the case before they come back to negotiate. And I think that we have a really great window of opportunity here to get a significant portion of funds for housing counseling. The National Foreclosure Mitigation Counseling Program across several years, I believe, had up to $800 million distributed for funding for different groups. And we might be able to get that same amount of money, God willing, in a much shorter time frame, which would be a huge boost for a lot of struggling agencies. But I won't belabor the point anymore. Just reach out to me if you want any assistance with reaching out to senators, and I'm happy to help with your advocacy needs. And I'll turn it back over.
Thank you, Melody. And so there may be virtual town halls going on in your district with your House and Senate members, and it is really valuable if you can attend those and make two asks, one of which is to support the $75 million for HUD housing counseling for fiscal year 2021 in the appropriations bill, and the second one is to include a substantial amount of funding for the COVID-19 stimulus money. And you can mention the Kamala Harris and the Senator Brown's bills, but you don't really need to be that technical on it. The real point is to message that. And actually, I just a personal note here. So NHRC had its 8th birthday on August 7th. That's our anniversary of when we actually got formed as an organization. There was a 6-month lead-up time when we were doing things, but that's the point where we actually had a formal structure, became part of TIDES, the foundation that supports nonprofits like us. And so we put out an email about this last Friday. And I want to say thank you for all the very nice notes people sent. It's just really touching, and it's been great. And one of the goals that we had was to elevate housing counseling in the public arena, and part of that is in Congress. And what Melody described, we are part of the debate right now, and we are a presence that years ago there was a whole struggle about whether housing counseling works or not. That's just never the topic of discussion anymore. Republicans, Democrats, all accept the value. We're seen bipartisan. People see us as a value given. And part of that has been your good work about communicating what you're doing locally in your communities. We'll do more of that coming up, but right now the most valuable piece is if there are any town halls that your House members and senators are in, to speak up, and as Melody said, really tell them the story of what you're hearing from your clients, any surge in numbers, and the importance of funding housing counseling through HUD and then through the COVID-19 bill. So all that's good. And let's talk now about the other big issue that's in our world, which is certification and counselor certification. So everybody knows now that finally the deadline, August 1, 2020, was extended for 1 year to August 1, 2021. And it's been kind of a roller coaster, and all of you have been through it with us, and many of you participated in different ways. So we made the original request for the extension on March 13th. Just saw the letter the other day when we had to reference it for when we were lobbying HUD, and it was at a point when COVID-19 was just breaking loose. So this is before everything completely shut down, but the testing sites were shutting down. And so that was kind of our framework. The testing sites were shutting down, and training organizations didn't know if they would do in-person trainings or not. And so that was the framework on which we did this. We had, but we were all concerned at that moment because we were under 2,000 counselors having passed the test at that point. And a lot has happened. A lot of you did a lot of great things on this, and there's been regular lobbying that we did on HUD. We had other sign-on letters that we, at significant times, tried to move the ball forward on. And then there was the House of Representatives letter, which was led by Mary Gay Scanlon outside of Philadelphia. She was approached by a Philadelphia organization, Southwest CDC, and she led a very well attended dear colleague letter that went to the to HUD on this, and then Senator Tina Smith was prompted by Minnesota groups, and she did a similar letter in the Senate, and both of those clearly elevated the issue in ways that we wanted it to. There were tactical inquiries, informational inquiries that happened, and they came from quite a few people. The ones I know off the top of my head were Maxine Waters in the House. She's the chairwoman of the House Financial Services Committee. That matters if you're getting questions like that. And Senator Menendez, I remember that when that one went out, and I heard about it from a number of HUD people. And lots of behind-the-scenes conversations. What was very valuable, and we just can't say enough how valuable this is, was the emails that many of you wrote and sent to HUD. And sometimes you'd send me the email and I'd say, really, you should be telling HUD this. And it's fine with me if you CC me, and it's great. I'd like to hear the responses. But those were cited to me when I would talk with senior management at HUD. People would reference those, and it was part of the whole process. They had many legal problems that they had to figure out and unravel. And as you remember, probably the Wednesday before the deadline, I put out a sad email saying I didn't think they were going to make it because they didn't think they were going to make it. But then just a little bit after 6 o'clock, David Young had written an email to them talking about the challenges that they had to do, and they had not gotten any guidance on how to manage in the particular time frame. And in the reply, Brian Montgomery told us that the extension had been granted, and this was the mechanism, and that's what went out on our listservs. It's where it leaves us right now is that we need to have a plan for going forward, and that's exactly where we're at right now. A lot of you have been working on this. We're going to spend some time on what the current thinking is, but you're the experts out in the field here, and we would really appreciate your input. Where are we now exactly? Well, so the latest numbers we've got is that 3,169 counselors have passed the test, which is a very good number, way better than the 2,000 we had last spring. And the 2,942 of them are on FHA connections, and you're not valid until you're on FHA connections. It does seem to take some time to make this happen. There are some glitches. I know there's a challenge for groups that are community development or CDFI groups who are already on FHA connection, that they have their own issues there. But we're elevating that with HUD, but we think that they are aware of it already, and hopefully that gets sorted out. But the fact is that if we've got 3,169 people have passed, and we're guessing that there's around 4,400 housing counselors in the field. So we've heard numbers between 4,000 and 4,500. But if that's around there, we're a little over 70% of the way, 72%, if those are the right numbers, where we're going. So that's very helpful. But we also understand that there are deep problems, and that's what these groups are working on right now. So we have experienced counselors who are doing good work in the field. We know and respect their work, and are having a hard time passing the test, and have taken them several times. There are people who are for whom English is a second language, are having challenges with if they're using the Spanish version with the translations there, and for other languages, there's no translation at all, and trying to improve their chances and figuring out what we can do to support them. Um, there's a broad range of those kinds of things. So one stream will be around working with existing counselors. We're also kind of revitalize the project we talked about last year, and that is creating a career path for people who are not in the field, who've maybe never have heard of the field before, but are looking to make a career change or to start their careers. And what the idea is to make housing counseling an attractive career choice and help prepare people and build a potential workforce, especially if there's a surge in funding that comes from the COVID-19. We're going to need a lot more hands on deck, and we're going to need to have people who are certified from the get-go. And so the nature of this project would be to recruit broadly, pay attention to the things that matter in our business. So the broad diversity of our field, but in terms of race and ethnicity, but also in terms of language skill, in terms of age, in terms of background. All of these are a strength of our business, and we want to try to figure out how to bring more people in with those broad ranges of life experience. We want to recruit around with a sense of mission so that people are coming to this work because they feel like it's a way of addressing some of the critical housing needs and community needs that are out there, and that it's that they're coming with some level of excitement and passion about what it is we do. And we'll experiment some in terms of what the kind of recruitment pipelines are, but community colleges, historically Black colleges and universities. We will do job placement programs. We will do programs where people are looking for a career change, a second career, people who are older. There are a variety of avenues there. There's a number of kind of ethnic organizations which we're going to try to make a platform for people to learn about housing counseling. So it's all pretty much in the we're forming it now stage, but the idea would be we recruit people in. We have a kind of intensive training program, and I'm hoping that we can raise the money so it's scholarship paid and it's not at the expense of the recruits, and use the training organization that exists today. Housing Action Illinois has shown a real leadership on this, but the idea would be to include as broadly as possible all the excellent training organizations that are out there, and to really use the training not to make somebody a polished housing counselor, but to get them to pass the certification test. And that way, then they can enter the field. They can go into the more in-depth trainings that are widely available in the organization. NHRC does not do training. We're not trying to compete with all the good work that's out there. We're trying to supplement. And so the idea would be to develop this core of people. We'll have a platform for people to say that they're available for jobs, and organizations can match up to what they're looking for. And the idea would be that it'll be a way for organizations to recruit, but mostly the goal is to recruit people who are already certified so that it's taking the risk out of the hiring process there. And then we hope that this will be a kind of a business line that will grow and will help strengthen housing counseling so that we can can create the next generation of counselors as some of our people age out, and we have a future to build. So But in the meantime, we also want to really pay a lot of attention to our existing workforce, who are very talented people and lots of deep experience. And so the goal here is, and what we're going to review on this call is the work that we're going to present ultimately to HUD about what they need to do to improve people's success experience, and then also if there are things we can do within our community as well, as we did in the past, as in, for example, creating the study groups and various improving on the trainings and things like that. So the groups that are there that are they're listed on the page, and we're going to talk about each one, and that's what Ellie's going to work with the next panel on. But it's the content of the test, it's the logistics of the test, and we understand there's been some improvement now, and we'd love to hear how that worked. But allowing, instead of requiring that it be a certain kind of camera that you can use, for example, your laptop camera, that just happened. The first few people have come through that testing, and that sounds like it's been easier. So we're very optimistic, but what other logistical questions are there, and does that actually solve the problem? I mentioned earlier about language and people who, for whom English is a second language. They're a very important part of our workforce, and we need to make sure that we are able to keep them in, because partly that's one of the underserved populations that we need to be sure we can serve well. Staff transitions is the idea that that when agencies might only have one or two counselors, and somebody leaves, retires, or whatever, how to manage keeping that agency going and getting somebody else new in. Obviously, platforms like this, when we talked about, as a possibility, but we really need to make sure that we're not having a start-stop world for our smaller agencies, especially. Learning differences. A lot of us learn differently, and we have a model that's very exam-driven that is sometimes hard for people to take. There are innovative things we can think of that can help provide those things we can present to HUD. And then training, there's lots of very good training going on right now. I think we're all impressed with how sophisticated we've gotten on this, but are there other things that can be done to improve it all? So those are the categories. One more quick thing on the bottom of the page here is the certification. So this is the link to the Federal Register that explains the change in the date for certification. There's a comment period, and we are going to make a comment. There isn't a lot to say. Ellie's pointed this out in another context. Really all it is doing is changing the date. But we've talked about it would make more sense for the deadline to actually be the end of the fiscal year for HUD rather than August 1. And the end of the fiscal year, so that'd be September 30th. So if we end up with some agencies, or even actually with any agency that had funded positions that don't have a certified counselor to cover it, then that money in their contract can't be spent for that portion of time after August 1, 2021. And it would be just administratively easier for everybody involved if you made that September 30th. That gives us a little bit more time. I have to say, one thing that's been sort of the mantra of the last 2 weeks is, a year isn't a very long time, and they still have a fair amount of ground to cover. So I thought we'd make that. If anybody else has any other suggestions around the comment periods, please let us know. We're open to ideas. But that's the one thing we will submit for sure. Good. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ellie and her panel, who will talk about the next steps.
Thanks, Bruce. Before we get started on that, I want to just kind of address a couple of comments that have come in through our question box about people not passing the exam, and that we had 3 years, and there were opportunities for people to take the exam online and so on. So just to be clear, there were a lot of people who took this exam multiple times and didn't pass it, and have continued to work really hard to try to pass it and haven't been able to. Those are people in many cases who speak English as a second language, in many cases who are our most experienced counselors. We don't want to leave them behind. We want to make sure that they're able to pass the exam. So those are two groups that this extension is important for. And also, you know, honestly, there's been a lot of issue with, I think, you know, Bruce mentioned in the learning differences, people just having a very difficult time taking this exam. And so again, this is another item that we're trying to work on. So I'm not denying that there was definitely a level of procrastination on the part of some agencies, but that wasn't the biggest part of why people weren't able to get across the finish line. And then the other thing, just to be really clear about, is that there were many counselors who studied for the exam as best as they could, who maybe didn't have the time available to them to take the exam more than once, weren't supported financially to take the exam more than once. So there's a lot of different reasons. So just kind of remembering to be open to our compatriots and the issues that they're having. And as we're moving through these different working groups and the discussion of what we're going to be talking about, I welcome and invite our presenters to give their perspective on that particular issue. So going forward, our first presenter is David Young, who has been on several times, and he's with Housing Action Illinois, and he's going to talk about the training subgroup and what kind of issues are going to be addressed in that group. David.
Hi, Ellie. Hi, Bruce and Melody. Thank you for the opportunity to again present to the audience. As Ellie mentioned, I am David Young, and Housing Action Illinois has been working for the last few years on providing training through our individual certification online study group. So it's been a real privilege to have been asked by the National Housing Resource Center to participate on this working group that they've formed to address the issues and making sure that we can help as many counselors as possible reach the finish line by next August. So we will be looking at a lot of different issues through our training committee. I think one, we will be evaluating what has been done in previous trainings, and then looking at what kinds of things can we add to trainings going forward. There are a couple of things that I want to acknowledge in my comments, and for many of you, this is probably going to be a duh statement, but I think that it is something that should be acknowledged. This individual certification exam is a hard test. That is what it is. It's a hard test. It takes time to study for it, but it is a hard test. And there are reasons why HUD designed it the way that they did, but it is a hard test. And so that means that, like I said, that people have to really study for it. One of the other things about this exam is that sometimes this exam talks or the questions are presented in ways that counselors are generally not working or are not the way that they speak to the consumers that they're seeing. And so like with a driving exam, right? There are a number of things that we do in driving a car every day that wouldn't necessarily be the way it's presented on the exam. But in order to pass the road test or to pass the written test, we have to answer the questions in a certain way. And that's the way that this individual certification exam works. And I think that for a number of counselors, especially veteran counselors, that was an issue because this is not the way that we do things, but you have to retrain yourself to say, this is what is being asked for on the exam. I'm going to answer those questions, and then I can get back to doing how I've normally done this. The other thing that I would really like to mention to not only to counselors, but also to the program managers and executive directors that are on the call, is that your housing counselors are very smart, they are very sophisticated, and it isn't necessarily from a lack of preparation or a lack of trying that is leading to them not passing the exam. Some of them are very, very close in terms of they're getting a 487 or a 493. So they're very close. And you want to make sure that you are giving them the opportunity to study as hard as possible so that they can pass the exam and continue doing the important work on behalf of your organizations. So right now, there are many different training options that are available. I mentioned that Housing Action Illinois has our online study group, which I know many of you have taken. There's training through RCAC, through NeighborWorks America, through Unidos US. A lot of organizations are offering trainings, and they're offering it in different formats. Before the shut-in order started, you had, for example, NeighborWorks America that was offering trainings at their training institute, so you could actually go for a week and take those trainings, and the same thing with RCAC and Unidos and NCRC. Now, most of the organizations have moved all of their training exclusively online. NeighborWorks America, I know, has a training coming up at their training institute, their virtual training institute starting next week. So if you haven't signed up for a class, you really should do that as soon as possible. I know that all of the training providers, including Housing Action Illinois, that after each session, we are evaluating the survey responses, we are evaluating test questions, and making changes to our trainings to help housing counselors so that they're better prepared to pass the exam. So it has not been something static where we've said this is the training that we've offered since 2018 and that's just the way it's going to stay. Every time, for example, that Housing Action Illinois has completed an online study group, we've gone back and made revisions to make it better and to serve counselors better. So one other thing that I wanted to mention, and Ellie is going to put up a poll because we're looking at additional options on how we can help the housing counseling community. And one suggestion that we've gotten from a couple of people is, would there or could there be online one-on-one tutoring available for the certification exam? And it's something that we've looked at. We've tried to figure out if it could make sense. And I just thought that it would be a good idea to ask folks on the call if this is something that you might be interested in, if one-on-one tutoring would be something valuable to you. So if you could answer that question, that would be great. And then the last thing that I'd like to say, this is what I'd really like to close with, is we've noticed through our online study group that we've had many housing counselors that have taken several of our online study groups, that have probably taken several other trainings. And I don't know if those folks have then gone on to take the exam, or if they've taken the exam and not passed, and so they've continued to take the training courses. But for those of you that have taken multiple training courses, but you haven't taken the exam yet, I'm going to use the analogy of the swimming pool. You can't continue to stand on the side of the pool and testing the water before you jump in. You are smart, you are talented, you know your stuff. Go take the exam. If you don't pass the exam, We can work with you through the trainings that we provide to help you brush up on what you missed, but don't continue to take trainings and not take the exam. And also, make sure that if you take a training that you are scheduling to take the exam within a couple of weeks, really within a couple of days of finishing that training, so that you can benefit from all of that knowledge being fresh in your head. So please continue to provide us with input about what you need, what you think is important. We are all going to be working very hard over the next several months to make sure that all of you cross the finish line by August 1st. Thank you.
Thanks, David. And I'm going to close the poll now. As of right now, about 55% of our participants have voted, and it's 64% say yes, they'd love to have access to a one-on-one tutor. So there you go.
Good to know. We will work on it.
Okay, so we are now going to move to our next presenter, Patricia Kidd.
Can I add one quick thing before you move on?
Sure thing, Lee. Go ahead.
Just for those who may not know, there is a Facebook group for support for folks taking the exam, and there's a lot of folks in that group who are providing additional support for people. I keep seeing posts where people pass and say it was because of the support they got out of the group. There are other trainers who are doing smaller like trainings that you can find out about in the group. So that's just another resource I want to make sure everybody is aware of. You just need to Google like HUD Housing Counseling Exam Prep, and they'll find it.
Great, thanks. Okay, so Patricia. Patricia is the Executive Director at Fair Housing Resource Center in Ohio, and she's going to talk about our subgroup that is focusing on test content. Patricia.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everyone's doing okay, and I know everyone is stressed. I am an executive director of a housing counseling agency. We've been doing this since 2003. I'm also an attorney. I also am an attorney who specializes in fair housing litigation. So I am here to talk about the actual text content. We have several staff in our office that have been unsuccessfully taking the exam and had a lot of conversation looking at the actual content of the questions. So the committee that I'm chairing is taking a look at what is the issue with the actual content. And one of the things that I identified immediately was the fact that I'm also an adjunct professor at a private university where I've been teaching for over 20 years. And I know when I give my students a new test and I have a huge pass-fail rate, then it starts to become an issue not about the students or about my teaching. It becomes an issue regarding the test. I am one of those unusual professors who will pass out an exam, whether it's a midterm or a final, and then I actually put in an Excel spreadsheet to get percentages of how many students miss a particular question, because it tells me that questions are bad. And I'm sure that HUD, did their best when they created this exam. But I do feel that there are some problems inherent within the actual text question. Many of you know that I'm also on the HUD Housing Counselor Exam Facebook page. I've been on there for months. I ask questions too, I answer. And I put out a poll a couple days ago, and one of the staff in my office, Chris Bowles, has also been prompting for questions, and I really have gotten a lot of input back from the housing counselors on some of the issues. And I am just going to generally go over them quickly, because this is hopefully information that we could take to HUD and get some type of a response, or for somebody to take a look at it. I know a lot of individuals wish that they could see the test, even if it's viewed remotely for a brief period of time, to understand what it is that they missed if they did not pass the test. Because it's very hard to keep studying for something if you don't know exactly what area or what questions that you did get wrong. Now, we know there's multiple versions of the test, but it is a way to help folks learn and not keep continuing to make the same mistake. I know there's an issue regarding the wording and the fact that it's incredibly confusing, and almost the question points are designed to confuse and trick rather than to gain an understanding of how much knowledge you have about the subject. The fair housing component is what I'm hearing the most about. The fair housing component is very difficult and it is confusing, and I'm getting the questions wrong. Now, I've been litigating fair housing for how many years now did I say? I am getting the questions wrong. When there's questions on affirmatively furthering fair housing, whether or not, this is a government funding issue or if this is a marketing issue, I saw one question and the answer is, well, it's both. And I've been identifying that there seems to be more, there's not just one correct response. And I think that's what's creating a lot of difficulty, because the answer becomes in your head, well, it depends, right? When you're taking it, well, it depends. And you go through the choices and several of the choices are right. So when you're looking for that, what's the best answer or what is the best option, it starts to become confusing. And I think if the questions were worded correctly, that there is only one correct response, we would see significant improvement in the number of people passing the test on the first time. The fair housing component goes through an entire section of the procedural process for filing a complaint with HUD. Well, I understand why HUD would want counselors to have a general information, but for counselors to understand all of the different steps from complaint filing to conciliation, to mediation and all of that, I have a problem with it because, one, that is work that's done for a fair housing enforcement agency or a fair housing, a FAP agency. It also kind of starts tiptoeing on the unauthorized practice of law. These are legal questions. This is legal procedure. And I really have an issue personally with the fact that that's even being asked on the test. I think it should be, affirmatively furthering fair housing is, if there's a fair housing complaint, it should be recommended to contact HUD, a FAP agency or a FIP agency, and then let the professionals handle it from there. I know there's been issues identified. Why do I need to know the dates of when these acts were put in place? It's 2020. I'm not in 1962 where we have to be confused. But I do think that went back to what Mr. Young was talking about, is that, the questions do surpass daily counseling activities. I do know that it's not filled with a ton of them, but I can see where some of the counselors would be questioning why that would be relevant to test. You're not just testing your knowledge, you're also testing, your ability to have a question presented to you, to apply the facts of the situation to come up with the best answer. And I do understand the complaint that dates aren't necessarily relevant. So I'm trying to work on, to simplify it down, to take all the information that I've been getting from the housing counselors on the Facebook page, and everything that I've been reading and communicating about, to be able to present back, some asks. What do we want to ask HUD? And I pretty much have 4 or 5 asks that we present a direct, explicit, singular question or problem, not to have it convoluted with dual and confusing language, and ask to eliminate excessive verbiage and irrelevant information on the ask. If you're going to use negatively stated questions, like what is not the best thing to do, that not is bolded, capitalized, and it's used sparingly, and to make the possible choices mutually exclusive. So that's like teachers speak for make them all different. Let's not have 4 choices that are 4 similar situations, because when I take the test, and I think I'm one of those that have been doing it way too long and my brain thinks differently, I'm not doing well on the test at all. Because every single question I read and then I go to the answers, my head keeps going, well, it depends. It depends. That seems to be my answer to everything. Well, it depends on, I need more facts to have a clear answer. And, you know, making sure that there is only one correct response. You know, we can only do our best. And I want to say that you're preaching to the choir. I do hear you. And David, I really, really appreciate you taking the couple minutes to validate the counselors' attempts in taking the test to their executive directors and their program managers, and the fact that this is an extremely difficult test. And we have a lot of really great people spending their personal time, working hard, studying for weekends, you know, and not being successful. And it breaks my heart. But, you know, to all the EDs out there, your staff are working so hard to get through this. And then maybe if we could get some tweaks to the actual text content, we're going to have a higher pass rate. That's all I have.
Great, thanks, Patricia. Okay, so we are going to go to the next topic, which is learning differences, and we're going to have Autumn Lubin, who is the CEO and chief enthusiast, as she calls herself, for Yellowwood Pathways. Autumn, you have to unmute yourself, Autumn. There you go.
I figured that out. Thanks, Ellie. Thanks, Bruce and Melanie. Thanks, y'all, for inviting me to speak briefly today about this whole topic of learning differences, because it's a broad topic. And so I'm just going to go to the broadest way possible and then narrow it down. So learning differences in its biggest form is that none of us learn the same way. None of us test the same way. And we all need different things to get us across that finish line that everybody's been talking about. A couple colleagues of mine who we all teach for NeighborWorks, Patty Brown and Jennifer Harris and I did some a session called Cram for the Exam. And one of the things that we've been doing in that teaching moment, that workshop, is to help people deal with some of the things that are keeping them from getting over the finish line. So many people have taken this test multiple times and landed in the 490s. And so what that tells you is that it's not that they don't know the material. It's there's something else preventing them from getting across and passing. And so some of the things that we've talked about in our Cram for Exam is the test anxiety and methods to deal with that, and finding your own learning style, because just because another person in your office who is studying for this test is studying one way doesn't mean that that's the best way for you to study. You need to do you. You need to do what works best for you to learn all of this material. And then I'm just going to say one more thing. I think it's much easier for people brand new to this industry to get in and study and pass this test, because those of us have been doing this for a long time. Look at that exam, and as it's been said before, and say, you know, that's not the real answer. And again, we have to study and answer the questions on this test as HUD wants us to know them, not how we do them. I think David set it up really well when he was speaking, but I just wanted to underscore that if you don't know anything about our industry, if you're coming into this thing cold and you're told to study for this exam, which is the way most professional exams are. You don't get into the industry until you've passed the exams. For instance, with real estate agents and things like that, you don't get your license until you pass an exam. Same way with attorneys. You don't get to practice law until you've passed the bar. And so for a lot of people in this industry, they're coming at this with a vast amount of information and knowledge that doesn't necessarily translate to passing the test. And so I just want to say that's out there. And so we need to find ways to help those who really know this, who really know this material, who really are out there practicing as counselors. We need to help them find the ways to get this done. And let me just say as a caveat, there are going to be people who are not going to pass this exam ever. I mean, that's the point of the exam, is to make sure that everybody who is in the industry has the same, at least base sense of knowledge. And so there's going to be some that aren't going to go there. And I think we need to make that part of our reality as well. But the ones that have taken this test more than once or twice or 3 times, I mean, I've talked to people who have taken it 6 and 7 times. Those, and they're coming up in the high 400s. That tells me it's not the extent of their knowledge that's lacking. There's something, whether it's how the questions are set up, but those questions are set up, and we need to learn to go through those and break them down. And that's what Jen and Patty and I have done, both with NeighborWorks and on this Cram for the Exam, is break those questions down and show people how to get through them. So there is a difference in learning, and there is some self-knowledge that has to go into this, as well as knowing the content for the exam. Most of us that have been in the working world for 10, 15, 20 years haven't taken an exam in a very long time. And so that's the other piece of it. So we're having to learn how to study again. So let me just move on from that and just say that I'm really glad to be here, and I want to talk about some learning differences and how they can be approached, and maybe help some of the counselors that are struggling the most, that have the knowledge they need. And so I want to talk about the accommodations that HUD identifies that they will grant accommodations for. And it's a pretty, there's nothing specific on this list. Let me just read it to you. The types of documentation that they want for a counselor requesting accommodation includes the following, and this gives you a clue into what they're looking for, what kind of accommodations they're willing to make for certain situations. And one of them is a recommendation of a qualified professional. Okay. Proof of past accommodations or observations by educators. A lot of this sounds to me like what you would work with students in school or college. Results of psychoeducational or other professional evaluations. So again, we're looking at either learning disabilities, or we're looking at maybe some psychological issues that are going to get in the way. A history of that diagnosis, and a statement from the applicant on the history regarding testing accommodations. That's the list. That's the description of the list. So what I want to say is, while it's vague, it's also clearly designed to pick up psychological issues and other diagnoses like ADHD or ADD. And so there are other things, though, that keep people from passing this test. Test anxiety is one of them. Does this cover that? And I think that's something we got to get clear with HUD on. does this cover testing anxiety? Because it's a real thing. It's a real thing. And so does this cover that? And what kind of qualified professionals do you need a recommendation from to identify test anxiety as something that could require a little extra time to finish the exam? I had a student who was a veteran with PTSD and requested additional time to take the test. She was concerned that she wasn't going to be able to pass it. And she got that accommodation. And she didn't use the extra time, but knowing she had it helped her get through the exam on time. Okay. Now, when you look at HUD's list of accommodations they will make, here's the list. They'll provide food and water for people that perhaps have a medical condition that they can't go the 2 hours without food or water, or medical equipment, for instance, oxygen. If they need multiple breaks, they can do that too. If they need to be in a private room, people that are distracted very easily might need a private room. Do they need a reader? Do they need somebody to read these questions to them? And do they need a recorder? Do they need screen magnification? Do they need screen reader software, attendance of their service animals, or a sign language interpreter? So these are the accommodations that they are willing to make, that they have stated they will make. But nothing on that list says extra time. And I'm just going to say that many of the people that I've been working with that are taking this exam multiple times and getting so close but not there are English as a second language speaker. And they're taking the test in English because the one in Spanish has some issues that Linda is going to talk about later. And all they really need is a little additional time, an hour maybe, just to know that they'll have time to get through the exam. They're not getting through the exam. And it is truly where they're having to read the question in English, translate, for instance, to Spanish in their head, translate, and then think of the answer in Spanish and translate it back to English to finish the test. And that process takes a minute. And, we need to allow them to have that moment. We need our English as second language speaking counselors. We know that many of our home buyers and homeowners and rental clients are English as a second language speakers, and we need people that can talk to them about these complicated topics in a language that's easily for them to understand. So we need these counselors. And so one of the biggest things here for me is, let's recognize text anxiety, and let's take a look at English as a second language speakers and just say, hey, you get extra time. You get extra time. It's not a disadvantage to other people who are English speakers first, native English speakers. It's not saying that they're not, that they're getting disadvantaged. What we're saying is, we're going to take some of our very valuable counselors and give them a little extra time so that they too can pass the test because they know it. Not because they need the extra hour because they don't know the material, but because they need the extra hour to do all that translating and thinking and in other languages and then getting it back to English. And so I really think the test anxiety and the English as a second language speaker additional time would be really important. And, we really need HUD to identify those two specifically. There's probably others, and that's what the working group is to discern. But those are the two that in all the time that I've been working with counselors on this testing, those are the two that are coming up as being significantly disabling to get past and pass the test. And so I really think we need to recognize those and get HUD to start thinking about that. When they designed this test, when they put this all out there in the beginning, they didn't know what the test takers' issues were going to be. They didn't know. But now that we know, and there's some data out there, now that we know that, we need to show them so that they can get on board from a perspective of not doing harm to the other testers, but making sure that those who have these two issues and others, and English as a second language is not an issue. It's not an issue. So that was me misspeaking. But that these two test takers get the accommodations they need to pass the test, because we need them. We do need them. So Ellie, that's about all I got, except to say I hope everybody's having a good day and you have a great weekend.
Great, thanks, Autumn. Okay, so we'll move to the next subgroup, which is logistics. And this group actually met, and Karen Hausneck-Yetman with the Belmont Housing Resources is going to talk about that group. And Karen, if you want to talk about some of the things that we actually came up with, that would be great.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Ellie. So yeah, my name's Karen. So I work at Belmont Housing in Buffalo, New York. And we have 15 housing counselors here in Buffalo. That plus some site closures and some issues with the testing sites. I actually helped kind of do online proctoring for almost 20 housing counselors to pass the exam. So I have a lot of experience with this, and I'm going to talk a little bit about, choosing, how you're going to take the exam, like what would be best for you. And then some of the suggestions that we came up with that we're going to talk to or bring up to HUD in the end. So if you look at your handouts, I did provide a list of criterion sites that were closed due to the pandemic. And their status now, if they've either reopened or if they're still closed. So if your testing site closed and you want to do it, at one of those sites, that might be a good thing to check out. And Criterion does update that list on a weekly basis. But when you're thinking about taking the exam, when you look at the testing facilities, a lot of the hours are still limited. So you want to Google the testing facilities, see if they're open. Most of them may have websites. Make sure, when you're going to go take the exam, especially if you're going to drive any sort of distance, that you recheck and confirm your test at hudhousingcounselors.com to make sure that it didn't get either moved or canceled or something like that. Because at one point in time, across the US, over 400 testing sites had closed and only about half of those have reopened. So there's a lot of testing centers that are still closed. So thinking about that, you may want to take it inside your office. But I think the first question you want to ask yourself is, what is my tech comfort level and how am I at brainstorming solutions with technology? And if I personally don't feel like that's something I can do I have someone to help me? And if both those aren't true, then looking at the testing facilities might be a good option for you. There's some other things with the HUD test that are different from the HACM exam. When you're taking the HUD exam, you have to have what they call full administrative rights to your computer. What that means is that you can download anything that you need, that there's no firewalls blocking what you can do, and that, that if you want to do something with your computer, that you could do it. So if you're trying to download software and it's coming up as a pop-up saying you need an administrator password, that means you don't have the rights to take the exam on your computer. So if you have an IT person, you may want to talk to them about that. Or if you don't have an IT person, looking at a personal computer, something like that. And finally, if you're going to take it in your office or your home, do you have a quiet place you can go to take the exam? So what we've done is we kind of made this list here in the office so multiple people could help get these online tests going. So a few tips on getting your computer ready is, if you can, trying to do your biometric profile early. you can do it right as you're taking the test. But I know for me, when I was doing it, I have a very long name that I had to type out. And I was very nervous taking the exam, and I couldn't type my name the same way, like the 10 times you needed to do it. So I wish that I had done it earlier, so then I just had to type it once and do it the same way as I would have had in the past. You know, when you're taking your picture for the biometrics, if you have long hair, make sure they can see your ears. And if you have glasses, you have to take those off, you know. And if you've taken the test more than twice, you're probably going to need to reset your biometrics, because we've had issues with, you know, staff going back in on their third attempt, and the biometrics just wouldn't recognize them. But when you're getting ready for the exam, you know, what you want to do is make sure that everything is disabled on your computer that you can, so nothing's slowing down your speed. Make sure that right before your exam, you re-download the Sentinel Secure. Even if you've already downloaded it, they update it very frequently, so you may need an update to that. If you don't have the newest version, they may stop you halfway through the exam. So our process is, you know, we re-download the Sentinel, we restart the computer, we clear all the history, all the cookies, the cache, the browser history, go back in to log in, and then start the test. And the last thing I'll say about getting, you know, doing your own online proctored exam is, you know, don't give up. You know, if you get kicked out, you can get back in. You know, I've seen people, again, on that Facebook group say, like, I got kicked out, so I just gave up, and I'll just pay and take the test again. You've already paid to take the test. You know, don't be too discouraged if you get kicked out. You know, talk to Criterion, find out what you need to do to get back into the test, and they will always reschedule you for a later date. If these things happen, that Criterion has been very good with working with counselors to get them back into the exam. So our group, some of the things that we've talked about, and some first thoughts on our suggestions for HUD, is number one is that we need more in-person test sites. You know, is there something more creative that we could be looking at to help with that? Something like a national partner, like a hotel chain. You know, hotels are not very full right now, and they all have business centers with computers. Could something be set up there where people could take the exam? And the Criterion customer service needs to have better contact availability. The chat function doesn't always work right away, and the phone support has been gone now for about a month. Hopefully that's coming back, but you know, having better phone support needs to be an option for counselors. Then beyond that, after you pass the exam, you know, having better instructions with FHA connections to get, you know, the certification and actually verify the employment. You know, is there something that, you know, your HUD representative could help with, so counselors aren't having to talk to their executive directors about creating the FHA connections accounts, that someone else can help out with that. And then finally, I think, you know, Criterion needs to be less worried about cheating. You know, the whole keystroke, you know, is very hard when you're, you know, have anxiety and you're about to take a test, you know. It's been a good change that they've changed the camera requirements, but I think that there's some other things that can ease up on a bit. And as a program manager, I'll just add in from previous conversations about if you have staff that are studying and trying to take the test, to help find a way to support them. At our agency, we actually allow staff to have 3 hours of quiet time each week to study, as long as they have the test scheduled within the next 6 weeks. So if we know that 6 weeks from now they're taking that exam, we want to give them time, so we're not bothering them with phone calls, that we're not, you know, sending them emails, so they can actually dedicate their time to studying for the exam. When we were all in the office, we were letting them do that outside of the office. Now, you know, when we're working from home, we just have time when we don't actually talk to them during that, as long as they have it, have the exam scheduled. And I'm happy to say, you know, supporting our staff, you know, paying for all their exams, everyone was able to pass by July 30th. And so we do have 15 housing counselors on staff that are all certified. So doing little things and supporting your staff can really make a big difference in helping them through the exam. And if you have other ideas for logistics or things about the computer setup, you know, I'm definitely open to any suggestions or any thoughts or any ideas on how to make this testing easier for our housing counselors. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Karen. Okay, on to our next subgroup is language. And Linda Davis-Demas with Balance, the Senior Director of Housing there, is going to talk with us about her thoughts about the kind of issues that we need to suggest to HUD to improve in order to support folks who speak English as a second language. Linda.
Thank you, Ellie and Bruce and Melody, for having us on. And for the interest of time, I know I have another colleague that will be presenting shortly. I'll try to stay and reduce some of the content. My colleagues have already mentioned several of the key challenges I think that we've faced with language in regards to the certification exam. So the first and most obvious one is obviously the exam is currently available in English and Spanish. And if you've had an opportunity to look at both the Spanish training materials and exam materials, I would have to say that as someone that is fully bilingual in Spanish and actually used to own a translation business, it's really interesting the way that the words have been translated, the way that they're phrased. And so several have mentioned, I would say Autumn and David have alluded to the fact that Spanish is probably one of the languages that we have the most bilingual staff available across the country. And yet the exam, the material is not really conducive to being able to understand the questions. I think when we look at the Facebook groups, as well as just counselors that have reached out to our organization, to other organizations, the thing we hear the most often is, I don't even know what they're asking. And so really just being able to take a step back and look at the content, the reality is knowing that there's 10 dialects just in Spanish alone, the Spanish that's utilized in this translated version is not general enough for most Spanish speakers, native speakers, to be able to understand it. And so I think that's one of the things that we've looked at, potentially suggesting to HUD that another group look at the material and translate it. The second, I would say, is when it comes to mortgage terms. So for any of us that are multilingual, the terminologies don't always transfer over easily. And so there are a couple of, I would say, GSEs have some glossaries. CFPB has a really good glossary available. FA has one available as well. And I think just finding some consistency in that language would be very helpful for the counselors trying to take this exam. I mean, most of these cases, we're talking about legal terms. So, I would say Patricia can probably attest to this. They don't always translate the best. And again, folks are having trouble just understanding the premise of what the question is. And then the third and not least is really the accommodations for folks that are limited English proficiency. So having been a counselor myself and being bilingual, and I can always attest to the fact that my Spanish speaking sessions always took longer than my English ones. And I see that with my counselors today. We almost always have to add additional time for a counseling session when it's being done in Spanish or another language for that matter. And so the fact that we don't have a accommodation in terms of additional time when it comes to this, Autumn, I think, alluded to it best when she stated that many counselors are having to sit there, process the information, and then think about it, because they've actually had to switch to taking the exam in English because it was easier for them to try and translate it mentally versus trying to pass the exam in Spanish. But I think most importantly, when we think about the populations that we serve nationally, Spanish is obviously a pretty prolific number, but we also have multiple languages. And so in my organization alone, we'll have up to 12 languages that we can serve. And we're not really, I don't expect HUD to have a translation for every single one, but knowing that as counseling agencies, we are required to serve limited English proficiency clients, I think we need to realistically take a step back and acknowledge that those services are being provided in some cases by counselors who also may have limited English proficiency. And so just looking at special accommodations as it applies to time, and also looking at the opportunity, someone had an out-of-the-box suggestion, which is perhaps even engaging. I think, Karen was talking about logistics, but looking at the possibility of maybe having a translator available, someone that could help the person taking the exam translate it into their language, right? And then help them understand also this is the language. All they're doing is providing a translation service. They would have no housing background. So that could potentially eliminate any concerns that HUD would have with undue influence. So I think there's really a lot that can be said. The most glaring is obviously the fact that we have native Spanish speakers that are struggling to understand the materials in Spanish, and so that needs to be addressed. But I think in addition to that, the fact that, we're not accounting for any other languages. And for those of you that were on the call, I want to say it was last week with OHC, Dan Barry mentioned, the fact that, they are concerned about cost, and that was a limiting factor into how many languages this material could be translated into. So I think we're going to continue to engage agencies. We've, reached out to HUD to find out any particular agencies that may be more engaged in the multilingual space, and getting some feedback from them, as well as the Facebook group, which several have mentioned in their conversation. So I think we'll hopefully be able to get a little bit more feedback as we build the ask to HUD. And I'll go ahead and, Ellie, pass it back to you to make sure Lee has some time to speak.
Great, thanks, Linda. Okay, so we will go to our final subgroup, certainly not the least. And Lee Lester, who's the CEO, Executive Director of Ubuntu Institute of Learning, is going to talk about what that group is looking at. And actually, again, this is another group that has actually already met. So Lee, if you want to talk about some of the things that we came up with, that'd be great.
Sure, and I'll try to make it brief because I know everybody's probably ready to go. Our group kind of broke it into 3 sections when it comes to transition, retention, what happens if you're a new agency, and then what do you do in the meantime if a counselor can't pass, or if you lose a counselor and that was your only counselor who was certified. So if we start with retention, one of the things our group came up with is looking at a way of really recognizing the counselor for this great achievement. And kudos to my co-panelists who've really talked to how difficult this test is, no matter how intelligent we think we are, right? This test humbles you. And it doesn't really test your knowledge. So really, really honoring them, and maybe offering some sort of designation, like, certified, et cetera, like in other disciplines, real estate agencies, and in the mortgage industry, you get that, I'm a certified realtor or whatever. So really kind of giving them that to help with retention. And then thinking outside of the box, a lot of agencies are offering raises to their counselors who pass the exam. So that's some motivation, in addition to, of course, just being able to continue to do this wonderful work that we do. And we, like all the other subgroups, are definitely open to your feedback. And so if you want to, please feel free to join and share information. But that was the idea we came up with regards to retention. And then if there's a new agency, like what happens with new agencies if you can't start counseling till you've got someone who's passed the test? So a wonderful idea was have some sort of grace period, if you will, that will allow for, like, if you've got you hire a counselor who's got experience, maybe they haven't been certified, maybe 3 months from hiring you to get certified. So something to that effect. And if it's a new agency, maybe longer. An idea that came up, which I thought was wonderful, is similar to what HUD is already doing with the fair housing agencies, where a new fair housing agency would come under like the umbrella of a established fair housing agency, and then they get a year to kind of ramp up, train, et cetera. There is a financial incentive for the umbrella agency, as well as funding for the new agency while they get ramped up. So HUD could use a model they're already using for new housing counseling agencies to be able to get certified in a reasonable amount of time. I thought that was an excellent idea. And then when we're looking at, before I get to in the meantime, before I get there, one other idea was having, in addition to having that designation as a certified housing counselor, also having continuing ed requirements. And I know under national industry standards, we have continuing ed requirements, but that's not a mandate of this that HUD is doing. And HUD's already got the model, right? We're not looking at recreating the wheel. HECM counselors have to have a certain amount of continuing ed training to maintain their HECM status. And we think that's good just for the industry. As we elevate ourselves to say this, we all have this amount of knowledge and we're all doing good work in our communities. I think if we're going to go as far as to have a certification, there should be some continuing ed to make sure we're keeping our knowledge at a certain level. And then lastly, let me make sure I'm not missing anything because I'm trying to hurry, is having a way for people to transition out, right? So one thought was agencies say, okay, well, I want to hire somebody because maybe I only have one counselor right now and they can't get certified. What do we do? So we would love to have HUD do a webinar for housing counseling agencies to be able to give us some direction in that space. They have said that we can hire, right? We can 1099 a counselor, that is allowed. But then what does that actually look like, right? If you're hiring somebody to do something you would normally hire them to do on a regular full-time basis, what are the tax implications? And maybe have a training with a tax professional or an employment specialist to make sure we're dotting our I's, crossing our T's, doing it the proper way. And then maybe also have a database of technical assistance providers who can help, you know, new agencies get ramped up or help in the meantime while you're looking to hire another counselor who can get certified. So that's a possibility. I know at our agency, that was one thing we were concerned with last year. And so earlier this year, we did create a database. Unfortunately, they extended it, so we don't need to use it now. But that was definitely something we were thinking about. And let's see, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. But definitely, I think the biggest thing was just making sure you have a plan, right? Making sure HUD kind of shares with us what we can do. I love the idea of having the qualified, like the two statuses for the fair housing agencies, doing that with housing counselors. So you have a, you know, HUD approved, and then maybe you have a conditional where they work under another HUD approved agency to get certified. And maybe the intermediaries could cover that, right? A lot of agencies come under intermediaries, so allowing the intermediaries to kind of take them under their wing for the first year while they're getting ramped up. I think that's everything that we spoke of. If any of the panelists who were on the call, if I missed anything, please let me know. But yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Lee. So before we go to questions, what I'll say is if people who are still on the call want to raise your hand because you'd like to verbalize a thought or a suggestion for any one of the working groups about things, suggestions that you think we should be making to HUD, we'd love to hear from you. And if you raise your hand up, then I'll know and I can unmute you so you can speak. And in the meantime, Melody, are there questions that we can have answered?
Yes, there are. Can you hear me? Ellie?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
yes.
Cool. Hi, everyone. So really quickly, one of the questions that we got, is it possible for, this is the whole panel, some people have said that they have, you know, struggled with the test because it's true they haven't done testing in a long time and they don't know what exactly to study for. Is it possible that counselors can get tutors or some sort of prep or something similar like that?
If they go into the HUD exam prep group that we mentioned earlier on Facebook, there's a lot of resources there, as well as through all the national intermediaries. So there's full trainings, there's boot camps, there's all types of training that will help folks who are kind of out of the loop. And I think David asked earlier about tutoring. I think that will definitely be something we'll be considering.
Thank you. Another person asked that this is probably for Ellie or Bruce, the HUD Office of Housing Counseling for a long time refused to reveal the passage rate for the test. Is there a number on that currently?
We don't have it. Apparently, so roughly they have told us that it's a 70% passage rate, and apparently in the beginning it was lower than that. But they were feeling pretty good about a 70% passage rate. But I have to say it was kind of an offhand comment, so I didn't feel like it had the strength of actual computational numbers. So, but that's the best we've got.
Thank you. Next, someone said questions can be very confusing. Can people figure out what the questions would be as to what is studied by each module? I'll give that to the panel.
So I think maybe the person is asking about whether or not they can find out what they did or didn't answer correctly, because right now I think that's an issue. You don't know what you got wrong.
Yeah, and I mean, you have to remember, and this is Karen, that all the questions do come from either the manual, or I know in some of the manuals there's links to other study material, that everything is coming from there. So when I had someone who did not pass, I would go through that with them, and it said, okay, you need substantial study in module 2.1. Why don't you go through and read that again? Especially like when someone had a 496, I'm like, that's what, like 2 questions? Like what can we do to get you over that so you can actually pass this exam?
Thanks. How can someone request extra time for the test?
Okay, that would probably be me. And this is Autumn. There is, if you go into the test taking center, there is a place where you can make that request. I will get that exact information to Ellie, and maybe she can get it out to everybody.
That sounds good.
Thank you. Someone just wanted to mention this as a note, or I guess around COVID responsibility. So one person said they had staff who took the test with Criterion recently in Boston area and were not comfortable at all with their COVID protocol. The seats were too close to other test takers. Does anyone on the panel have any comments on COVID-19 protocol for different tests and what counselors can do if they feel uncomfortable?
Well, and I'll say, in logistics, we did talk about that as well. And that's why, we said there's got to be more places to take the exams. And there's got to be more options other than testing centers, like we had brought up, business centers at hotels, or could a library be an option, or other places where people may feel comfortable, especially if you don't have the computer equipment to do it on your own. So it's definitely a concern, and it's why a lot of the testing centers have closed. Like I said, it was over 400 agencies throughout the country.
Okay, thanks. Karen, how many counselors did you get through the exam?
So it was 14 counselors in my organization, and then I helped 3 counselors at another organization in our area that needed help.
Thank you. For a new hire, typically, how much time do they have to pass the test? Anyone?
I think that's going to depend greatly. Oh, sorry. I was just about to say, I think it depends on the agency, though, too.
And so for your agency?
Hello?
Linda, I think what Bruce is...
Oh, go ahead.
Linda,
Sorry,
I think Bruce is asking
give,
for your agency.
Oh, we gave, let's see, we've had 2 new hires, and we gave them 90 days, essentially. But what we did was those 90 days, they were focused on just prepping for the exam. And I think Autumn mentioned this before. We found that it's easier for someone to pass if they have absolutely no counseling experience. So that helped a great deal. But they were focused predominantly on studying. They weren't taking clients, obviously, because they were completely new to the industry. We had dedicated training time, check-ins with them, And in addition to that, we also let them observe sessions so that they could at least hear and understand everything that they were learning, what that actually meant in a session and how that looked, what the feel of that was, so that it helped them understand a little bit better.
Thank you. Next question. A number of valid concerns and issues have been identified regarding the exam, and I'm sure many of you have spoke to, but what is the likelihood that HUD will consider adjusting the current test materials and or accommodations for the test, in your opinions?
So for those of us who were around when the first HECM exam came out, the HECM exam was much different. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to change this one, but HUD has in the past changed exams and made it fit more into counseling when needed. But I don't really have any sort of idea about this exam and what that would be like, but I know they're open to ideas.
So, and I can just jump in here. They have made changes on the test, and there was a whole about a year ago. There was a whole going through the test to try to make the questions clearer and less tricky. And this obviously has come up as that continues to be a problem. But and apparently they continue to revise it as they go in minor ways when they hear about particular questions or I think I always try to get this from them. I never actually got it, but that there's some questions that seem to have a higher problem rate. So right now they're very interested in trying to figure out if there are other things that need to be done, and so it's a good time for us to be raising things.
Thank you. Will tutoring have examples of the questions that will be on? Will tutoring have examples of questions that are similar enough or the same as there will be on the exam? The reason they're asking is because the HUD assessment and pre-test online aren't the same as the way the actual exam is designed. I'll open that question up.
This is Lee. I have found that the structure of the practice test is actually quite similar. So what I do in my boot camps, or there is a live open Q&A that we post in the Facebook group, we actually kind of deconstruct each question and teach participants how to figure out what the question is asking. And I found that to be very helpful.
Thanks. Does HUD have a rule for new hires? Yes, that is okay. I will answer this one. HUD doesn't. Let me clarify. The question is, does HUD have a rule for new hires to become certified? My understanding is that if an agency does not have a certified housing counselor, they cannot provide housing counseling services, and they won't get funding going forward. Would that be 100% accurate, Bruce?
Yeah, no, yes. So people have to pass the test before they can counsel.
Yes.
And they also have to be an FHA connection.
Okay. That is it.
I would also say that needs to be this is Autumn, that needs to be a part of our national industry standard so that everybody is implementing that in the same manner. So if HUD's not going to give direction about it, I think we should at least have it in our standard. That's my opinion.
Okay, so Melody, you said that was the last question?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so Toy Collins, you have your hand raised, so I'm going to unmute you. Oh, you are now self-muted. Are you there, Toy? Okay, I'm not able to get Toy unmuted. I think there's one other person that had their hand up. Let me get to them. Oh, I think that person took their hand down because I don't see them anymore. Okay, so I guess that's it.
No. Ellie, I see Toy Collins raised her hand.
But she's muted.
Oh.
I know, but I can't get her unmuted.
Let me see if I can. Oh.
Maybe make her a presenter.
Looks like she is self-muted.
I just made her a presenter.
Oh.
So let's see if that moves her into the staff column. Always exciting. So does it work now? Still self-muted.
No. So I guess that's it.
Okay. Sorry, Toy. All right. So we should move on?
Yes.
Ellie? Okay, great. Okay. So thanks, everybody. Just a quick reminder about becoming a member of NHRC. It's a valuable membership for us to keep going and allowing us to do the advocacy work that we do. It's been a very good year for us, so we appreciate that. And you can go to our website to get the membership form and dues structure and all that. And we still have discounts on the student loan program Savvy and the credit reports, but the main thing is supporting the work we do. We haven't scheduled the next leaders call, and we're timing this some to see what happens, but so we don't have one scheduled for August. We'll probably pick up in September, but unless there's something that really explodes in the next couple of weeks, we'll jump on that and let you know by the listserv. Besides that, thanks everybody. Thanks to the panelists who did a very good job. And if you're interested in being on one of the subcommittees, we'll just put email Ellie or me, or maybe both of us. I guess the language differences, the language group, and staff and training and the test content are still lined up to be held, and next ones will be on Friday and then some on Monday. So shoot us an email right now while it's on your mind, and we can get you the details if there's particular subcommittees you'd like to be on. The learning differences one, I'd love to get more people on. I think there were some very good ideas here, but we could really use some extra voices there as well. But anyways, anyone that you want to participate in, let us know, and we can link you up. All right, thanks everybody. Good call. All right.